All right. You should be live now. All right. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone, and welcome back to What's the Tea with Anew. So my name is Angie, and I am a community educator here at our agency. And of course, we have our wonderful executive director here. It's always great to have her presence and her knowledge on here. So we do want to welcome her. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Angie. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. So those of you that are settling in, make sure you share this video to your social media pages. Grab your tea or whatever beverage that's non-alcoholic that you would like to sit and share with us today. And for those that are tuning in that are confused when I said Anew, maybe you took a break from social media and you weren't aware that we changed our name. So if you go back to our video, check out our rebranding video that was launched last week to get a better understanding of the changes that we have made. Because the agency has worked so hard to implement these new changes, and we just have been so excited. So we are Anew, building beyond violence and abuse. So make sure you check that out and you tell everyone so they are aware that we are not SSFS, South Suburban Family Shelter anymore. So we have put that in our past bucket. So I know that's
our good friend that we've taken a lot of loving care of, and we're kind of moving forward into the next phase of our work.
Yes. So of course that name has been with us for 40 years, but now, you know, like she said, we are moving on to just better things and bigger things, and just stay tuned for everything that we have in store. So if you have been paying attention, we have been sharing a lot about baby safety awareness this month. So September is known for baby safety awareness. So going to give some little background information. So the JPMA, which stands for the Juvenile Products Manufacturers Association, they have annually been educating parents and caregivers on the safe selection and use of juvenile products. However, we are a domestic violence agency, so we wanted to put a twist on it and speak about baby safety awareness as it relates to children's exposure to violence, okay? Because it's safe to say that children's exposure to violence is significantly greater behavioral, emotional, and cognitive functioning problems among children that unfortunately leads to difficulties in adulthood. So, of course, who is better to talk about that but Jenny?
I can think of one other person or two other people.
We definitely can. You know, but you're definitely on the list. However, we do have other great staff that can come on here and speak about this, which will be touching on some services. So make sure you watch the whole episode, okay? Look, I know Kelly's like,
I know, right?
So yes, so
maybe I would be really good.
You know, I think so too. Of course. So Jenny, today we are going to be talking about children's exposure to violence, okay? So if we can just start off just by simply speaking about what happens when a child is exposed to violence. What actually happens?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that can happen, and it really can depend on the age at which the child is exposed to violence. So what might be surprising to a lot of people is that even when babies are in utero, when they haven't been born yet, they can be impacted by violence that the mom experiences. So the stress levels and the cortisol levels going up in the mom impacts the baby as they're developing. So sort of, it's not the same thing, but similar to that concept of like what the mom kind of ingests into the body is passed on to the infant. That same kind of concept exists in terms of experiences and really high stress levels. So essentially what we've learned is that 0 to 5 is the most important time of brain development for all of us humans. Like that's when the most growth is going on, and when synapses are connecting and brain paths are being formed and all of this kind of stuff. So when very young children are exposed to violence, whether it be in the home, in the community, a natural disaster, there's certainly all sorts of different ways that one could be exposed to violence, it can impact the way in which their brain develops and builds or doesn't build some of those pathways. So that's probably like the simplest way to say it. So you sort of have your, if everything goes fine and smooth and there's no sort of upsetting things that happen, the brain kind of develops in this sort of typical way. But if there's violence exposure, especially repeated exposure to violence and trauma, then the brain will develop, it will change the way in which the brain develops, which is completely fascinating.
That's really interesting, which of course makes sense to why they say, hey, take it easy, try not to stress, things as of that nature. It's so interesting because not too long ago, I seen a TikTok video of this mom. She said her son was 7 years old and, they were at a family function and he just came out the blue and said, mom was really sad when I was in her belly. She cried a lot and she's like, I wasn't sad. I was fine. And then she was like, I really wasn't fine. I cried every day. And, he said, I felt mommy cry every day when I was in the tunnel. And that was really interesting to me because, sometimes not to be, project all parents or all adults into that category, but sometimes when, young kids say things, it's like, oh, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. But that was really interesting for me to see. That this 7-year-old was speaking about his mom being sad the whole pregnancy, and he felt that. And that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I've actually never heard of that. And usually, even when I hear of, it's usually younger kids that have certain kinds of like memories that you're like, whoa, how do you remember stuff like that? But usually by the time they're 7, you wouldn't really hear something like that. So that's pretty incredible, but it does impact whatever mom's going through when she's pregnant, does impact the baby before the baby is born.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in speaking to the fact of just remembering, because sometimes we play games with ourselves like, wait, that happened, right? I vividly remember this happening. And, of course, if, that parent does not remember, sometimes, we kind of play games within ourselves, feeling though, wait a minute, am I overreacting? But what you seen, what you saw.
Yeah, so well, our brain makes choices for us sometimes about what we do and don't remember in order to protect us. It's a very, brain science is super interesting, and the brain exists to protect us in all kinds of different ways. So
that makes sense. So do you feel that when a mom is pregnant and she is experiencing this violence, would the child come out to be automatically more attached, or maybe feeling that sense of attachment because they felt what mom went through?
I don't really know that much. I do know, I don't know that much about the in utero, how much that impacts the attachment relationship. So that's a really interesting question. Maybe Kelly would have the answer to that one. But we do know that exposure to violence and the caregiver experiencing violence and thus kind of having to deal with that can impact that attachment relationship for littles. And for people who are viewing, everyone has a different attachment style. There's I believe 4 different attachment styles. This isn't like my major expertise on it, but there's basically a healthy and a secure attachment, and then there's a couple of different ways that someone can have an insecure attachment. So the secure attachment is obviously the healthiest attachment, and baby moving through healthy development and having that attachment relationship. But also something that's really important about that is learning how to become independent and essentially kind of detach, so to speak, as they move through the appropriate developmental levels. And if that secure attachment isn't there in the beginning, it makes it difficult for baby to become more independent. So you will see things like clinginess, extra clingy behavior, or your little ones, like we see sometimes in childcare, kids who just become so distraught with mom going into counseling, even just separating in the same building for that short time for mom to go to counseling. Some of the kiddos cannot cope with that. I've seen way back when I first started, in this work, there was a little boy in our shelter program that he would get so upset when mom was away from him that he would throw up. Like he just couldn't cope with it. That makes it then hard to go through all of those developmental stages that we typically would go through to kind of move into our healthy childhood, adolescence, and then into adulthood. So there is so much that can happen in those early years that has a significant impact on who we are, and how we interact with the world as adults. It really is the most critical. It really is the most critical time.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. So I know that you kind of spoke on some points already, but what are some of the other short-term or long-term effects that children might have?
So some of the things that you're going to see with kids, and again, they vary depending on developmental levels, but you can certainly see a lot of clinginess, and inability to kind of explore the world. So if you've ever been around little kids or babies, you might see this behavior. Well, they'll go off and play with something, and then they'll circle back and sort of check in with the parent, and then go off and play a little bit more. And as they get older, they might go farther and farther away. So you'll see that maybe not happening as much. You'll see potentially where, and this might feel counterintuitive to people because we all like the baby that will go to everyone. But sometimes that's problematic. Because sometimes the baby that will go to everyone is the one that doesn't necessarily have a secure attachment, where sometimes securely attached babies don't want to go to everyone because they're like, this is my person.
Yes.
Want to be my person.
Yes.
So you might see one where they feel like over familiar to you as a stranger. They have no preference for their primary caregiver, which is not a typical way for an infant to kind of move through the world. So little ones, it's kind of stuff like that. You might, another one that would be odd for really little ones is a kind of a flat affect, or not having a reaction to things, especially if you have kids that don't have a startle response. So, they hear loud noises or something crashes and breaks or something, they don't respond to it. Whereas normally you would expect that kind of thing to sort of startle little ones. So you might see some of that kind of stuff to happen. As they move through, they might be delayed in their developmental levels, and it may not be severe delays, but they're falling behind. They're taking a lot longer to reach some of those milestones, which can be very difficult to pinpoint, because some of those milestones, there's quite a big range for what's considered to be normal for that. Those are some of the things I can think of with the real little ones off the top of my head.
That makes a lot of sense. So is it true that if a mom is experiencing violence while pregnant, could this lead to premature birth? Could this lead to, unfortunately, miscarriage?
Yes, definitely. Depending on the severity, what's happening, whether there was physical abuse, we definitely see premature labor happen in moms who've experienced abuse, just more difficulties in pregnancy, somewhat in general, more depression, more likelihood for postpartum kind of issues afterwards, particularly if then afterwards they don't get the support that they need. So, I mean, I've seen with my coworkers, some pretty awful things. It's not uncommon for abuse to escalate during pregnancy. So this can be a very dangerous time for someone who is in a domestic violence relationship. I won't even tell the stories. Like I'm kind of thinking in my head, some of the things that I'm aware of, and that, my coworkers at other agencies that have dealt with folks that are either going through their pregnancies or immediate post giving birth. And it can be pretty awful. It can definitely be a dangerous time. And it's really difficult for anyone to be a new parent. But then when you've got someone who's continuing to abuse you or restricting what you're able to do when you've got your newborn, that absolutely it's gonna impact that baby.
Absolutely. And we do tend to talk about this a lot, how the most dangerous time to leave is when a person is pregnant. And it's very interesting when talking about this, because I'm sure you also see maybe a lot of pregnant moms that are not getting the prenatal care that they need, which also plays a role in the development of their child. So that could be a whole nother thing. Just imagine not getting, seeing a doctor, not even having an ultrasound, not even knowing, what's the different vitamins or medications you might need to take, or imagine having preeclampsia, or, maybe you have an abuser that, or a perpetrator that won't even allow you to maybe go give birth in a hospital. So it's so many different levels to that can really be detrimental and scary.
Yeah, there can be a very high level of control, whether or not, the partner, right, is allowing access to medical care. Sometimes they do, but they have to be there all the time in a way that's controlling, not in a way that's supportive to wanting to be at every appointment. So, and it can be very scary and dangerous to not have any access to prenatal care. And then for us in particular, so at our agency and in the area that we serve, our highest demographic is African American women and Latinx women. And we already know that the maternal mortality rate is very high for the people that we serve in general, that the types of maternal care that they get are not up to the standards that they should be. So, most of the folks that we work with are already starting from a place where they're not getting what they need. And then this can be a layer on top of it.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are, we love to talk about protective factors, not necessarily the risk factors, but those are.
And I'm gonna like be looking over here because all my protective factors are on my bulletin board.
Yes. I love speaking about this topic. It's just so interesting. So what are oh yeah, see? So what are some of the protective factors that might mitigate these risks?
Yeah, so protective factors are my favorite things in the world, which is why they're always on my bulletin board, folks, and they've been there forever. And my favorite quote, I think, that's important to understand about protective factors, and this was stated by Dr. Carl Bell, and he would always say that risk factors are not predictive, because of protective factors. So essentially that means you might have a lot of risk factors, but the protective factors can overcome those, or can, make it so that we hear a lot about at-risk youth or at-risk children. And quite frankly, they are not doomed as long as what's important is that we're putting effort and time and focus into protective factors. So in speaking about the community, really the biggest protective factor for any child is to have one adult that believes in them, that loves them, that is there for them, that they have a strong relationship. That is the number one protective factor, hands down. And if that can be a parent, that's awesome. Some kids are lucky enough to have two parents that they have their really good relationships with. But if it's not a parent, it can still be, that it's an uncle, or it's a grandparent, or it's a coach, or it's a teacher. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be in the family of origin, because unfortunately there are some kids whose families just are not safe. And won't ever be safe, but still having that healthy, strong relationship with one adult in their lives is by far the biggest.
And I know that we really try to speak about this in the school system, because we always hear teens and adolescents speak about their distrust of parents or school professionals or coaches or just anyone. And so we really try to talk to them and letting them know, like, hey, I know a lot of times, especially at this age, you want to talk to your friend, and that's totally fine, but have someone that can give you the necessary resources that you may need. So we really try to open their minds to that, because maybe some children don't think that their basketball coach or volleyball coach could be seen as a protective factor or a trusted adult in their life. So we really try to focus on this in the school system, speaking about trusted adults all the way down to pre-K, just to get their minds open of knowing that, hey, mom and dad, that could be, a safe person. Or maybe if not mom and dad, it could be grandma or your aunt, so there's a lot of different ways that we try to open their mindset up to that.
Yeah. And I've talked to adults in the school system about this when I've had the opportunity. I talk to them about how, whether they know it or not, that they may be that one adult in a child's life that's in their school, that child feels like they have a connection with, that person supports them. There might not be anyone else, and they might be that one person. And you hear stories about this all of the time, for people talking about, like, this one teacher that really helped me, and I've saved all the letters that I have from them, or I'm going to go back and visit them when I graduate from wherever. 30 years later, they're still teaching, and they go and visit them. Or the coaches, like, they can have a really strong impact on kids' lives. And sometimes I think it can feel overwhelming to, like, how do we solve this problem of violence exposure and all this thing? But I mean, really, I strongly believe that we all have a part to play, and we can. And sometimes it's, building relationships with the kids that are within your circle. You don't have to do this big global thing, but sometimes it's sort of one person at a time.
And I definitely can agree with that, because, of course, statistically, this may be the statistic from 2020 and 2019, but they say over about 3.5 million children see some type of abuse in the household annually. So it's really scary to even think about, the moms that were dealing with pregnancy, or the children that were dealing with the family violence during the whole stay-at-home order, and what might that look like, and how scary that might have been, so that I always think about that too, when discussing this. Do you think that children who were exposed to violence have a much more harder time identifying a trusted adult in their life? Or do you think they have a hard time accepting the fact that they do have someone that they can trust in their life, even, maybe if it is a school professional?
Yeah, it really depends on the kid and what their community and their circle is like. You know, how
Okay.
isolated are they or not? Um, Now I'm kind of forgetting the first part of your question because I had like two different
Oh, no,
things to
it's okay.
say.
It's okay. Yeah. So do you think that's a child that is exposed to violence have a harder time realizing that they may have a trusted adult?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I was going to say, so yeah, it depends on who's all around them. But also, I mean, one thing that can happen is that their ability to trust can really be impacted by their experience. So they may have adults around them, but whether or not they trust them could be something to that, whether or not they feel like they can trust anybody else because the people they were supposed to trust, right, are hurting them and aren't trustworthy. Maybe they've had a lot of promises broken. So that's also a big thing that I talk to adults about, not making promises to children that you can't keep. Because I know that it makes us feel a lot better. You know, I'm going to do so and so, and you're never going to get hurt again. Well, none of us can make that. None of us can control what's going to happen in that child's house for the most part. So, and sometimes kids, depending on their age and developmental level, like they really take those kind of promises to heart and can really say, but you said that I would be okay and I wasn't okay. And you didn't make anything happen to keep me okay. And so now I'm gonna shut you out and I can't trust anyone anymore. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of
we
sense.
have to be very careful about what we say we can and cannot do because there is a lot that we can't control. We can control what we do in that space, in that time with that child.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you tend to see, and maybe if you haven't seen it per se, or maybe you've read about it, what about children's exposure to violence and then as they get older, having abandonment fears or abandonment issues? Do you tend to
Oh,
see
for
that a lot?
sure. Well, and that's related a lot to attachment. So
Okay.
there's certain ways that an insecure attachment can develop that is like that, where it's related to parents not being available in the way that babies and toddlers need them to be available. So it's a baby who, you know, when babies cry, they cry because they have a need. And in that
Right.
secure, healthy environment, the parent meets the need. Well, when you have babies that cry and don't get their needs met, their brains wire in a certain kind of way. So,
Mm.
and then they kind of grow up,
Being
you
conditioned.
know, and
Yeah.
either don't try to get their needs met or don't expect anyone to get their needs met or try to get their needs met in ways that adults perceive as being really counterproductive. You
Yeah.
know, we might perceive it as another kind of way. You know, sometimes people will say, that saying that the children who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving ways or something
Yeah.
to that
That
kind of
makes sense.
effect,
That makes a lot
you
of
know.
sense. So, what can parents and caregivers do to help increase the health and well being of children and families?
Yeah, so it's showing them as much love as possible. You know, it's pretty simplistic. If you've got kids in your life, you know, being supportive, being loving of them, trying to communicate as positively as possible with them, building them up as much as you can. You know, which these sound like easy things to do.
But when you're a parent, you know.
Except that it's not. And especially when you're a parent who's under an extreme amount of stress, and you're experiencing your own trauma and you're just trying to get through from one day to the next,
Another.
trying to have that, like, I mean, I know for myself as a parent, I feel like I'm a really good parent when I am centered and stable and nothing is rocking my boat. If
Yes.
I am not in that place, it is hard for me to be loving and understanding and not be negative and not, you know, start to yell or get frustrated a lot easier, or, those kinds of things. Like, I kind of have to be able to be centered and cared for and in a good place to be able to do those things for my child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of us parents are probably nodding our head like, me too, Jenny. Me too.
So when I think about, one thing that frustrates me a lot is I think there's a myth out there that parents who are experiencing domestic violence can't be good parents or aren't good parents. And that drives me bonkers because how much they have to deal with and process, and the amount of energy that it takes to parent your children while you're being abused is just, it's so much. It's so overwhelming and unbelievable if you haven't been into it, that actually they're like incredibly amazing people to be able to do the things that many of them are doing for their kids while they're enduring what they're going through.
No, I can definitely agree with that. That's so interesting that you say that, because I definitely agree. And all parents are different, but I would think to assume maybe is being in these situations, of course, you want to be able to be there for your child, but sometimes, you're enduring so much violence just to keep them safe, which is a whole nother story, unfortunately, because now you're also trying to protect them from ongoing violence as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes in order to protect their children, they end up having to experience more violence and abuse to keep their kids. I mean, it's impossible choices. Like I just, it's so much. And generally speaking, and I'm going to speak about mothers specifically right now, the majority of the people who come to us that identify as victims of domestic violence are women. Our society in general here in the United States isn't super supportive of mothers and motherhood to begin with. So we're kind of put up on this pedestal and given these impossible expectations that it's so easy to fall from, and people hold mothers accountable to this standard that is just unattainable to begin with. So our moms that are experiencing abuse are getting nowhere near the support from the community that they really need. So it kind of does beg that question, like, where is that village then that's supposed to be surrounding and supporting and whatever? Because anytime you see a mom that's having a really hard time, they're almost immediately shamed or blamed or judged for what's going on, and no one's really taking the time out to kind of figure out what barriers is this person going through and overcoming in order to parent their kid in the best way they can given the circumstances that they have. I mean, we have plenty of parents that have experienced domestic violence that are completely fabulous, wonderful parents.
Now that I can agree with everyone watching, that was the real tea of the episode, because I agree with that so much. I definitely agree with that. And of course, when you've never been in that situation, when you never had to walk in those shoes, we have to be careful of the projection of judgment that we put on other people, because we wouldn't know what we would do or what we would have to endure, if we never been in that situation.
Yeah, you don't know what choices people are being given, one bad choice from another bad choice, and you've got to pick one somewhere,
So at our agency, at Anew, we provide services entitled Safe from the Start. So can you give a brief overview about Safe from the Start and, the services that are, provided within that? because I know that our coworker, Kelly, she works very closely with that program.
She coordinates that program. So
absolutely,
yeah.
yeah. So she coordinates that program. So if you can give some information on that for our viewers.
Absolutely. So Safe from the Start is one of my favorite programs. It's a grant program that's actually a statewide grant program. So there's, I think at this point, there might be 11 or 12 Safe from the Start sites throughout the state. I think it's about 20-ish years old that this program has existed. So it's administered on this state level. And the whole focus of the program is to provide services, trauma-focused services to children 0 to 5 who've been exposed to violence. So it is children exposed to any violence. So often the programs are working with kids exposed to domestic violence or sexual assault, but any type of violence exposure is eligible for the program. It has really helped shape what our program looks like because there's specific assessment tools that are included with this program to help really get a handle on how that exposure has impacted the kids, and then a lot of support around how to support that child and their siblings. So even if they have siblings that are older than 5 years old, they can be part of this program. And there's a lot of specific support around not only the child's work, but how the parent and the child unit work together, which is really important when you're talking about kids like 0 to 3, when you've got really little ones who are under 3, where they're not really verbal yet, where a lot of people might be like, how could you possibly do therapy with a 2-year-old?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And this is the kind of program so that when we talked a little bit earlier about attachment, like that's a big piece of doing that kind of work when you have them very little, 0 to 3, is you're really, it's sort of like this idea of the relationship is your client rather than one or the other, because you're really working on how do you support that relationship and how do you support the parent to best support the child and work on that piece together. So it's a really great program. It was ahead of its time. I think a lot more people now are realizing the importance of focusing on 0 to 5. Obviously, more people are realizing the importance of focusing on trauma exposure and its impact. So that's one of those things that I'm not sure that people realize that's so amazing about our agency is that we've been doing this now for a very long time. And there are a lot of other places that have only just figured this out in the last 5 or so years. So it's definitely a level of expertise that we have here.
Yes, that is really, really amazing. And if you're watching this and you're like, I have other questions, reach out to us. We, by all means, would love to answer any questions that you all may have. And maybe you're watching this and maybe you or a family member or a friend, maybe you don't know if you're necessarily in an abusive relationship. Maybe give us a call and we can definitely provide you with more resources. So before we get to the questions, Jenny, is there anything else that you would like to speak about or announce or anything?
Oh, I don't think I have anything to do.
I put you on the spot. Any announcements? I feel like anything else that you would like to touch on?
No, I'm interested in seeing if there's any questions.
Yes, Celeste, any questions?
Okay, ladies, so I see one question. It states, how can Anew support these very young children and their parents who've experienced violence?
Well, I think, part of it is through the Safe from the Start program that we talked about a little bit. And then another piece of it is actually through Angie's program in community education, where there is a big focus on, we have like a preschool program that really focuses on this idea of helping kids identify feelings and building up protective factors and being out in the community and educating folks about the fact that, yes, children are impacted by violence and you have a role that you can play in supporting them. So Angie can talk about how she supports this age group.
Yes, I was going to say, yes, I agree. So as you all know, myself, Zach, Lysandra and Celeste, we are a part of the community education program, and we give presentations from pre-K all the way up through high school and even further. So we focus on topics such as hands are not for hitting, family violence, teen dating violence, and Zach has done an amazing job as well with our BRO group, which stands for Boys Respecting Others, which is for young men 5th through 8th grade who have experienced some type of violence in the community or the household. So if you are viewing this, you say, these presentations or BRO groups sound so interesting, right? Please reach out to us. You can definitely reach out to Celeste or myself. I'll make sure that, maybe Celeste can leave her email in the comments so that individuals can reach out. And again, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us because we will be more than happy to provide these services to you all.
Yeah, I find that community members, people in general that don't do this work every day like us are really surprised at how infants and toddlers, how that exposure to violence impacts them. Like it's surprising, it's shocking, it's sobering to people because the myth is out there that children don't know what's going on, and that they aren't impacted if they don't directly see it, or that they aren't impacted if they aren't directly yelled at or directly physically abused themselves. So there's definitely a belief out there like that, but they are really surprised to hear that growing up in an environment with abuse, they don't have to see it directly. They don't have to have someone physically hurt them. Kids they feel the tension in the house. They learn how to walk on eggshells at very, very early ages. They learn how to placate the adults in order to stay safe at very, very ages. And they carry those lessons throughout their entire lives. One of the things now that I'm thinking about it again is sometimes infants become very difficult to soothe. So they have a very hard time. One of those stages that infants go through is eventually at some point they learn how to soothe themselves. So when they're really tiny, they rely on the parent to help soothe them and help them cry, help them calm down and stop crying and all of those things. And having that adult be able to do that for them helps them then to learn how to soothe themselves.
Yes.
So when they aren't able to have that from the adult, then they don't then learn how to soothe themselves, or it's much more difficult for them to learn how to soothe themselves. So you might have that, an infant or a young child where it's extremely difficult for them to calm down. And then those are, this idea of, we call it regulation, this idea of being able to regulate yourself or to figure out how to calm yourself down is like a really basic brain function that carries through the rest of your life. Like you have to be able to build that part for the rest of your brain. I go like this because the brain develops from the bottom up. So that regulation kind of stuff is at the bottom, and the better you have at the bottom coming together, the easier it is for the rest of it to kind of build up. So people are really fascinated to learn about that kind of thing. And I think that it causes some folks to move to action. So, if the whole point of this long thing is, for us at Anew, that's what we want to be able to do, is to educate people that then moves them into action and helps them to see how, again, we're all part of being able to create this world where people are able to get the love and compassion and support that they need, that we believe will ultimately lead to less violence in the world, which is
absolutely. Yeah, and speaking about the soothing part as well, when we do speak to, our pre-K, 1st and 2nd grade, we do breathing activities with them to try and teach them how to calm down, So this, really helps. Of course, they're like, oh, this is a game. But really, we're teaching them how to be able to soothe themselves, because you're going to get upset. You're going to get mad. You might be sad, and this is okay. These are feelings, So we try to teach them that, everything from mad into happy, you might feel, but how could we calm down? How could we soothe ourselves during these frustrating times? instead of, walking out of class or, throwing a tantrum or anything like that. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out what we can do that helps you feel better. So that was a really good point as well.
Yeah, adversity is going to happen to everyone. You can't protect your kids from bad things happening, but you certainly can prepare them for how they deal with it and where they know they can get their support from when those things happen.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this was great. This was amazing.
Gone by really fast.
I know. I was like, oh man. But this was so amazing. I just want to say thank you again for continuously just being on here and giving your expertise and your knowledge to
I'm always surprised that you keep asking me back.
You're just stuck with us. Every month we're like, yep, we have a spot for Jenny. So we want to say thank you. And for those that have continuously been tuning in, thank you so much. Thank you so much for adjusting to our time change. If you don't remember, 1 p.m. 1 p.m. is the time change, okay? So we're the same place, different time and different tea, but we're still here. So we want to thank you again. And remember to share this information with any friends, family, or professionals that you may think this video will really be helpful for. And if there are any other questions, we just want to say thank you and tune in next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.